Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar. We're going to give people another couple of minutes to join, and then we will kick things off, so hang tight. All right, we are going to go ahead and kick things off. Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on adopting a user-centric approach to threat detection and defense, which is such a great topic to use as a closing point for National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, which I'll talk about more in a second. But before I do, quick intros. I am Dr. Christine Walcourt, your moderator for today's conversation. Some background on me: I've worked in the cybersecurity industry for over a decade now. I've led a variety of cybersecurity functions at large companies like United Airlines before taking on my current role as the CEO of Cyber Pop-Up, which is an on-demand cybersecurity service platform. Now, I also earned a PhD in security engineering, so absolutely just obsessed with this industry, and I'm so happy to be a part of this conversation. With me joining, we have the pleasure of speaking with Ken Lawrence for this session. So Ken has been in the IT field for more than 20 years, extensive experience in many facets of information technology, including networks, IT systems, ERP, security, data center, cloud convergence, everything you would want to have at the table here. Ken also spent 15 years in the military. Thank you for your service. And since leaving the Army in 2002, has held several positions from Director of IT Operations to Senior Vice President of IT Operations and Global Security. And so his industry expertise spans several different verticals, including manufacturing, pharma, medical, finance, and more. So a wealth of knowledge and experience with us today. Thank you, Ken, for joining this conversation.
Absolutely, Christina. Thanks for having me.
Awesome. Now, October is a month that generates much buzz amongst the cybersecurity community. It's, again, National Cybersecurity Awareness Month, and it's a time when security professionals work around the clock to really raise awareness of the different threats and cyber risks amongst general user communities. This is especially important in an era where human-related cyber threats are at an all-time high, right? From the intentionally malicious insider to some of those unmindful employees prone to different errors. These threats can have significant consequences on companies, no matter what size you are, right? And so for today's agenda, we're going to dig into this topic. We're going to talk about these user-centric approaches to reducing cyber risk. We'll start out with some of the latest trends that we're seeing around the human element of cybersecurity, which is really important. We have some interesting stats there. We'll talk through some examples of human-enabled cyber attacks and breaches, along with some of the challenges that exist in trying to reduce those risks. And then finally, we'll close out with some tips on things that you all can do to move forward, along with a quick demo or showcase of what this can look like in practice. Now we have time for questions at the end. However, feel free to submit questions throughout the session. I will keep an eye out for those in the chat, and we will aim to get through as many of those as we can. Also, be sure to stick around until the end. We will be giving away $100 Amazon gift card to one lucky winner, and so stick around to see if that is you. Now, jumping right into the trends here, I want to start with a few trends and stats that I think help set the context for this topic and this risk and threat landscape. So the first 19 out of every 20 breaches involves human error. So human beings remain at the forefront of attacks, and oftentimes, again, it's not intentional. Another interesting one, 25% of employees admit to sharing passwords with family and friends. So this is just a very, typical example of how these employees oftentimes aren't intentionally trying to be malicious, though we organizations deal with that intentional malicious insider as well. But oftentimes these are some issues that people are just unaware of the grave risks that they might be introducing to organizations by doing some of these behaviors. Another behavior that is also concerning, 50% of employees share a company issued device with friends and family. And as we continue to adopt work from home models and hybrid strategies, this gets even heightened, right? Because these devices are constantly outside of the office. And then last one, a good handful of employees don't even lock their phones or don't lock their devices. And so I think as employees get more comfortable with working remotely in shared working spaces, at the park and a cafe, at a beach, whatever the case may be, if they decide to leave their device, and run to the bathroom or go grab their coffee at the counter and it's unlocked, right? All it takes is that split second for someone to take that device or do whatever. And then, of course, guess what? That can be considered a breach depending on what kinds of information might be on that device or what kinds of resources that device has access to and so on. And so this is just a stark reminder that we have to pay attention to how these user behaviors impact security. And so this is a good lead into our first question to set context and ensure we are all on the same page. Ken, what are your thoughts on these trends? From your view, how do user-based threats show up in enterprises?
I'll tell you, Christine, I think from what I've seen, I think I can classify these maybe into, four buckets, right? So you mentioned it at the very beginning, right? You've got the accidental user, right? Who just, it's just something unbeknownst to them, they hit something or they have access to things that they shouldn't have, right? So you got the accidental user, then we've got, the careless user that just kind of looks at and thinks about what we're talking about, but doesn't really apply it practically. And then you've got those individuals that are sitting in, more visibility. Their situations are more visible, and so they become victimized because they become targets, right? So I think that's your third user. And then finally, you just got the malicious user that just wants to, has malicious intent. So I think that's how I classify them, the accidental, the kind of careless user, the one that's high priority victimized, and then the malicious user. And I think that's, if you look at those, that's going to kind of really surmise what you're going to be looking at internally.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd be curious, what is there one that concerns you more than others, or do you feel like these are all just like major issues that companies should be paying attention to?
Well, obviously, I think you have to pay attention to all of them, right? But we do tend to put more eyes on the admins and those types of users, right? Thinking in the malicious user kind of mind frame, right, is what we're thinking about. But I think you have to apply it equally across the entire environment, right? If you don't do that, then you're always leaving yourself, there's an exposure there. So I would weight them equally.
Yeah, makes sense. Thanks for the insights. Now digging into this a bit more, there's tons of examples where insiders have caused these kinds of breaches, no matter what category you're looking at. It reminds me of a few stories that align line with some of the different points that you covered. The one that we have on the screen right now is, one for Microsoft, but again, a couple of others pop up to mind as well. There's so many examples. In this case, though, for Microsoft, user error led to a database being leaked because of employee negligence, essentially. So this happened where a security researcher discovered that there was a publicly accessible database that contained 250 million entries that were accumulated over 14 years. And this database included, support cases and details, emails, IP addresses of customers, customers' geographical locations, and all of the notes made by Microsoft support agents for these accounts. This database was publicly accessible for about a month. And then, once it was discovered, they did the work to secure it as quickly as possible. But how did this even happen? So basically, Microsoft had deployed a new version of Azure security rules, and those employees had misconfigured those rules to cause this accidental leak. And so this is, again, a situation where it wasn't necessarily, malicious intent, right? There was an error that happened that led to this large breach and this large link. Another one, though, that comes to mind, thinking about the different examples that you just mentioned, is one where it's not user error, right? And it's actually someone malicious. One that comes to mind is GE, General Electric. Their employees stole trade secrets to gain a business advantage. So basically, two employees of GE stole data on their advanced computer models for calibrating turbines that the company manufactured. They also stole marketing and pricing information for promoting that service. And with that stolen IP, one of the employees started a new company and started competing with GE and making those, turbines or calibrating those turbines. And so GE lost several, prospective customers or things like that to this new quote unquote competitor. And when they discovered that this competitor was actually founded by one of their employees, they reported that to the FBI. They started investigating and everything, and realized that this employee had stolen all of this information and used it to start their own company. And so those insiders were actually convicted and sentenced to prison time, as well as 1.4 million in restitution to GE. But when we think about how this happened, right, they downloaded thousands of files with trade secrets, and information from the company servers. They sent them to their private email addresses or uploaded them to the cloud. One employee even convinced a system administrator to grant them access to data they weren't supposed to have access to. And none of these malicious actions, at least to what's been reported so far, triggered any response from cybersecurity alerting systems or anything like that. And so just another huge example of how this insider threat can play out from a malicious insider perspective. And so I know that's a lot, quite a few examples there, but we could go on for hours. There's so many out there.
Absolutely.
So the question for you is there's some commonality across these, right? And so what trends and challenges do you think are enabling these attacks, and what are your thoughts there?
I think this is a perfect example, and we can go to multiple articles and things where there's GitHub repositories, right, that are left open, and it takes a long time for the discovery, and you're in the same situation as Microsoft, right? And so I think as we continue to evolve and move to automation and move to this whole cloud platform, right? We've got to become really familiar with the activities of our people, right? And I think that when we start to think about this user behavior, that gives us part of it, but then there's also rule bases and things that we can set to also give us these types of alerts. So I think this will continue to, we're going to see more of this, right? We're going to see more of this. And so it only becomes more and more important now that we drive down to the lowest level, which is looking at and understanding what the individuals are doing and what they have access to, because it's going to continue.
Yeah, that user emphasis is important. Now, I want to dig into that more, but before we do, I think there's another element of this sort of insider conversation to loop
Mhm.
in. Now, we all know that third parties can have significant impact on a company's security posture, right? For example, there's the Marriott breach that happened,
Yes.
where that compromise happened because of a third party app, right? And so in that case, hackers basically abused a third-party application that Marriott used to provide guest services. They were able to gain access to 5.2 million records of Marriott guests.
Mhm.
Those records included contact information, gender, birthdays, loyalty account details, personal preferences, and more. This was discovered when the security team noticed this suspicious activity that was going on around that time. And so this happened because attackers were able to compromise the credentials of two employees and log into that third-party application. And this went on for a couple of months before it was discovered. Now, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this one. Do you believe that third parties should be considered insiders, or how does that play into this entire conversation?
Oh, I absolutely do. Um, when we think about these third parties, right? It can be, from the HVAC system, right, which we're aware of, all the way to someone that you may have API connections with, right? And so you absolutely need to look at all of these third parties as insiders and apply the same controls to them that you would apply to anyone else in the organization. We can look again. We can look in the newspaper. We can see, well, the newspaper, right? We can look online and see that this is a continual problem where a third party has an issue of some sort that then lends itself to your internal network, your folks becoming compromised, things moving within your network with no visibility. So absolutely, it's right there with the employee, in my opinion.
Yeah. Now we've talked about some of these, trends. I would agree. I think that insiders play a huge role as employees and everything in between. I think even to a certain extent, it can be a little bit more concerning just because of the challenges with gaining visibility into some of those things. It's
Yes.
a bit more complicated, right? Now, getting into some of the challenges that are sort of impacting this area before we start getting into some of the solutions, right? We've talked about trends. Okay, so what are some of the underlying challenges that you think companies face when they're trying to reduce insider threats?
I'll tell you, when I look at this list here, that we see this every day when we start to look at these challenges. We know that as we said, the human element, right? The human part of this is always going to be our biggest exposure. It's not the technology, it's not the automation, it's the human piece, right? And so it is inevitable. And so we've got to think today, how do we put those controls around it, right? Uh, if we've got to make the internal folks feel more comfortable, and they have to understand that we're looking at these things. We then drive that fear piece out, right? Because from a risk standpoint, we want to know when things happen. Uh, it's it again comes back to something we talked about early on too, which we touched on a little bit, which is awareness, right? We've got to be out there. We've got to be talking to the organization. We can have tools, we can have a lot of things, but we need to be able to talk to them, right? And then we need to be able to understand what's the data that's coming in. How are we reading that? How are we actioning it? We can do a lot of things, but we need to be able to measure the success of the programs that we have in place, right? So I feel like these are going to be challenges that we're going to continue to face. And as we become more and more, again, automated, more and more technical, things happen through service accounts, things happen through other means. We've got to continue to drill in on these, but all of those things are set up by humans, right? So again, there's going to be mistakes, but we have to have visibility on those things. And so I think, again, let's as a security community, we've got to really elevate our game and really start to look at what's happening inside of our organizations down to the user level. So how do we reduce it? Diligence. That's how we reduce it. Good tool set, diligence is how you reduce it. That's what I could speak on this one, Christine, for an hour.
Yeah, no, I agree, and we'll get into some of the ways to reduce it in a second. But just to
Yep.
add to that on the challenges, because I think it's important to, before you start really digging into solutions and ways to solve things, right? It's like understanding like what are we up against here. And I think another important part of this conversation, right, is are these trends in the fact that inside, like, external attackers are now using the dark web or going through different means to recruit people inside of companies to do their dirty work. And so there's this challenge of realizing that from a user behavior standpoint, people might have like the best intentions initially, but you know, if an offer is attractive enough, or if there happens to be some bad situation that an employee is in where they are more susceptible to or more willing to work with those external attackers, we're seeing that become an issue for some companies as well. And so that becomes a challenge. I think another one to dig into as well is the notion of, from a technology standpoint, when people try to use traditional tools to then identify, okay, who is a legitimate employee who's doing their job well, or what are the anomalies, or what's the like weird behavior that we're seeing that might be something suspicious. I think in those tools, if you're not using the right ones or approaching this in the right way, you end up with either a lot of false positives, right, which is a nightmare in itself. I still remember the days when I was sifting through as an analyst, literally hundreds of thousands of alerts, losing my mind, all the way to the opposite end of that spectrum where you're dealing with false negatives, right? Which is where there's
Absolutely.
a bad actor or something going on, and your traditional rules or things are not able to detect that. And it's like, when how all of this ties together, right? It's like when you have an employee who is an insider, which is harder to detect, right? They might know where they might know where the different security alerts are and things like that, and have knowledge for how they circumvent them. But then they're also helping this external party get in. It's like, if you don't have like very advanced or very robust user behavior analytics or things that you can use to pay attention to those behaviors, you get so many false negatives, and you miss out on that visibility altogether. So yeah, to your point,
Great example. That's a great example. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was gonna say, to your point, like I could go on about this
Oh
for
boy.
hours.
Yes.
But I'm sure people want to get more into, okay, what we know that these challenges exist, right? We understand them a little bit better now. What can we do about that? And so yeah, when it comes to solving this, right, it's like you need a user-centric threat management program that is very layered and has different elements from training and awareness and things like awareness month to being able to analyze user behavior. And so for this one, like tell us more of your stance on this. How can companies create a more user-focused threat management program?
I think one of the things that we need to think about, and I go back to this a lot, and it's communication, right? That's how we drive these programs all the way down to the newest individual in the organization, right? And without that, we're spending a lot of money and a lot of time, right? Let's be honest about it. Without that, we're spending a lot of money and a lot of time. We've got to get down to the individual level, and we've got to communicate with our staff and with our folks. That is the key, in my opinion. That is the key. and we have a lot of things, right? And we mentioned it before at the bottom. It says leverage next generation, threat detection and response tools. You touched on that, right? You've got to have the right analytics behind what you're bringing in to be able to make heads or tails of it. I can remember the same days you can remember chasing log files from a firewall to try and figure out what was actually going on and what was real and what wasn't, right? But those are two different ends of the spectrum. But I think you have to start with your people, and I think you have to have a robust tool set to really understand what's being done, because as you mentioned, an individual may have access to a lot of things as part of their job, but if you put all of those things together in a short period of time, it might not add up.
Yeah, and just to expand on that more, you touched on the sort of technology and the tools that are required, super important. And it's like on
Mm-hmm.
the other end, and this is something that I'm very passionate about and spent, quite a bit of my career just focusing on, and that's around that training and awareness piece and
Yep.
leveraging opportunities like Awareness Month to really highlight and educate users on what they need to do, and just some very tangible examples. I know we're at this point getting towards the end of Awareness Month, but definitely something to think about into next year, and also realizing that Awareness Month isn't just like, okay, we talk about
Yeah.
cybersecurity in October and then we're
So we're
done
done.
until next year, right?
Correct.
No,
That's right.
absolutely not. It's like it has to be a continuous conversation. And so I still remember, like, I was leading at one point cybersecurity training and awareness for 90,000 employees across 350 cities. And so it was a really robust program that I would have people on my team like planning like several months in advance, and so it's
Mm-hmm.
never too early to start. But I think that just some tangible takeaways for folks who are listening, and how this ties in on the training and awareness side as well too, is to think about, one, like what are the biggest biggest threats or issues that are truly facing your user base today, and how can you create content and create programs that really align with that and really engage people in and meet them where they are. For
Yep.
example, in my case, like I was tasked with trying to figure out how to change cybersecurity user behavior for everything from, I spent quite a while working at United Airlines. So it was everything from, how a pilot thinks about cybersecurity, to how somebody in marketing thinks about cybersecurity, to how somebody in the technology or development decision thinks about it. Like, there are all these different lenses. They're all facing different threats. And so it's understanding how those users behave in their day-to-day work, and then figuring out how, between some of these awareness engagements and trainings that you put out, how you can help them, as well as, again, how you loop in that technology to understand their behaviors, which can be a very effective way of driving risky user behavior down.
You got it. You got it. And I think there's two things I would maybe add to this. When you put together those programs, right, at American Airlines, you had to measure the effectiveness of your program in some way, shape, or form, right? You didn't just espouse a lot of things to people and then kind of walk away. Somehow you had to measure the effectiveness of your program. And that's what I would say to everyone. When you put these things together, because there's a lot of time and effort that goes into it, right? A lot of these things are board facing, at least the tech committee of the board or something. Be able to measure the effectiveness of your program, right? Because that'll allow you then to go back and truly say, here's where we are. And because there's always a funding question, right? So do that, and it'll solve the second one, which is getting what you need, right? To really drive these programs. So I can't say it enough. Measure the effectiveness of what you're doing and take that back to the board. Right.
Yeah,
But
absolutely. That measurement is super important as well. Now, as we continue down this path of what are solutions and things that we can do about this, it's definitely better, in my opinion, to show you real options and real solutions versus to just talk about this in theory, right? And so we have Suzanne Parent here with us today to also give you a walkthrough of a solution from Veriato's perspective, and some options and things that can help solve a lot of the challenges that we've already discussed today. And so I'm going to hand over control to Suzanne. Give me 1 second. And Suzanne, are you there?
I am. Thank you
Okay,
very much,
perfect.
Christine.
Welcome to the virtual stage. I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you. I think my screen is now showing.
Yes, we can see you.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. And of course, the subject, as Christine mentioned, isn't an October conversation. It is a all year continuous conversation. And some of the things that I want to cover here are going to address, and I have a couple of slides before I actually dive into the platform. So what we're going to talk about is the ability to have a focus on the three things that the platform needs to address. So we heard that we're talking about the ability to monitor and look at what an insider can be doing. We're going to look at a little bit about productivity and engagement, although I will focus more on security and compliance. So those are the two pieces that are really going to focus on the cybersecurity element of the platform. The name of the solution is called Cerebral, and it addresses three pieces. So it's a single integrated platform. What does that mean? That means that whatever you need at any time is embedded in that same platform. It comes with the ability to see the activity that you're monitoring from every single user. It comes with the ability to see behavior changes. So Christine and Ken mentioned anomalies. Well, anomalies are based on a certain baseline or a behavior. So we're going to look at how that works, as well as combining those two. So you're combining the user behavior analytic component and monitoring the activities. Combined with those two, you can then look at more of a predictive risk score. What does that mean? There's about 25 different elements that are measured throughout the platform that tells you what condition or what that user might be as a risk in the organization. All of this is powered by what we refer to as an AI. It has the ability to look at the data through statistical analysis and determine a risk score as well as an employee behavior level of risk for the organizations. Just so you know, every tool, every environment that we have has actually been tested. It's actually passed many different tests within the CERT Insider Threat Center. So we have and have been better than many in that sense. So I just wanted to share with you what those results are, and they've been unbeaten within the platform. Oh, excuse me. There we go. So we're going to look at first at the, sorry, get back to the previous screens. We're going to look at two pieces. We're going to look at the insider threat security and the compliance and what that means. So essentially, we know people are working remote. The future is 50% of the employees are most likely going to be staying home. What has that done? What has that done in the last 18 months is that from a compliance, and we call this a compliance nightmare, is you're always able to track a document when you were on an environment that was a network was inside, you were able to track the document. And now the compliance issue is that the document no longer is accessible if there's a breach in that head office in the house or the kitchen where the employee is. But one of the good things is that we continue to monitor with the environment. We continue to monitor and collect the information of the user wherever they are. So even if there is a breach, not a breach, but a break in that link, we continue and we use the cloud and we send all the data through to the cloud. Another way to look at it is where all the files are now leaving. They're literally leaving from a security breach. You're going to not know where the files are. They're all over the place. And having the ability to track what's going on with those documents, who's using them, where are they when they're using them, is critical piece. So part of this platform is going to give you that capability across multiple devices. So let's look at what those devices are. So of course, some of the devices that your employees may have would be running a Mac OS. It could be a PC running Microsoft OS. Of course, terminal servers, so users, you're sharing You're sharing access through a terminal server. And then finally, the Android devices are also accessible, and the agent is deployed on each one of those. Your environment can be deployed on an on-premise environment or through a virtual environment. You could have your own private cloud if you choose to, or look towards another private or public cloud such as Azure or Amazon or any other cloud that's available out there. So what does the agent record? This is a busy slide, I know, but the point is to show you that there's a lot of information that is available to you, but it's not easily accessible and it's not aggregated in a way that you can make it talk to you or be meaningful to you. So what we do, our agent collects the data. It collects data across all types of events on the platform. So look for file transfers, document tracking, network usage, all the applications that your users are accessing or running, how long they're accessing them, when they're starting them, and if they're actually using it at the time that they're running it. So the difference between an actively using it versus focused on using it. User print capabilities, what we call removable devices. The ability to track this geofencing here is related to your Android devices. So you set up a fence, you set up an environment, if you enter the fence or leave the fence. So we have the ability to alert you on that. All the emails that are sent, received, whether they're webmail or whether they're webmail and Exchange. All the chats, some of the most used chats. All the websites visited, any searches. I know I'm going on, there's a lot of pieces to it. But all that data, once it's collected, can then start telling you things. But you also need to be very clear on who has access to that data. So the platform gives you that ability to be very specific on who has access to the data. So from a security point of view, it's using a role-based environment. What kind of features our platform will give you that you can give permissions to, and then finally, what are the data elements you're giving access to as well. On the third piece that I talked about was the risk score. The risk score is going to be built to give you a view of a user and the potential risk in which it is falling under. So this ability, and it takes all this, by the way, is based on a 30-day rolling data. So it's important to start the collection of the data now and continuously monitor the users so you can have a baseline in order to be able to compare these different scores. The whole platform, and I will jump in a minute on the platform itself, but think about the whole platform being almost sentient, so looking and watching and analyzing and alerting. The rest is all you. So after we've done the watching for you and analyzing, you then will go decide what's important to see and how you're going to react. So all this is going to be part of either an internal process that you've defined, or you can go in and look at the data as you get the alerts. So let's jump in, and I will actually show you the platform right now, and we're going to look at different types of views, whether you're looking at it through reports or looking at it through different DVR-like screenshots, and we're going to get right into this. So now this is the platform. So the platform on the left, you can kind of see a little bit of the different modules. So every single platform has full access. If you remember earlier, I talked about role-based, they wouldn't get everything. So now I'm actually showing you everything that's capable. Let's kind of look in this particular, this is a security privileged user, and all the ability to see all the data by employee, who's running certain admin tools. What if they're not admins and they're actually using some of the tools that will give them the ability to dive into your data? All the applications would be listed on this platform. Let me start with particularly how we actually collect the data. So every single user or every single device will have a recorder or what we call an agent that's installed on those devices. This is a real quick overview of what are those capabilities that I was talking to you about are all on and off. We were talking about screenshots. We were talking about chat activities, websites. Every single one of these can be monitored by different users for different purposes. So the screenshots we're taking as a default, we're taking every 30 seconds. And super simple. Everything is granular. Everything is really deep down. I'm showing you high level information right now of the ability to monitor and capture this information. So whether you're doing the 30 seconds or want to change it to 40 seconds or a minute is all up to you. And then we will take those screenshots based on the settings for each of the recorders. Chats, websites visited, email activity, all these different data points that we're collecting are going to be accessible for that user on the platform. And it's used to do a lot of the aggregates and a lot of the behavior baseline. One of the things we do have as well is just blocking the cloud altogether. So if you didn't want any uploads to the cloud, you would select this and it would just, so it's very simple and it's very granular. Everything is based on a policy and you can create as many policies, whether they're a high risk employee or within a particular department. Once you've done that, there's a couple of ways, and I'm going to show you really briefly a little bit about the dashboard and how that actually works. The detailed report that you would get for an anomaly, for example, this is a sample of what kind of report you would get. So you would have an employee who is malicious and looking to upload documents. Now, this is a summary of what this particular user has done. With documents, so we're tracking an anomaly and you would have received an anomaly for that particular event as it took place. And you would then decide if this is something that is significant. And I would think it could be significant because cloud storage uploads is outside of their norm. So you would then go and check that out. So everything is driven based on the data that we're collecting and the ability for us to show you that data. The dashboard has 115 different views, 115 different ways that you can look at the data, but of course that's never enough. So you want to be able to customize your own, and you can do that as well. So one of the views that I'll show you here, for example, is an investigation that you want to run. You've identified a user. You want that user view of data that they're the data that they're actually using. You can just create a quick chart and then click through and see this is significant. Tara's actually moved a lot of data through the cloud and removable. So this is significant. Let's go quickly check to see what the data looks like. And simply every single one of these is an active load and an active view of all the data that they're doing. And you can determine here quickly that all this information that she's been downloading, well, that might not be enough. You want to be able to see the snapshot. So the ability to just download every single view every 30 seconds, if you remembered, then we talked about that earlier. These are all the screenshots that have been taken. Out of here, we have, for this particular person, the employee, we have 593 screenshots. The ability to quickly go through like a DVR, just literally see every single file, where it was monitored, where it was sent, or if any one of you has done any movie type of editing, you can move through it just through the timeline. Any questions? Christine, if there is anything, just let me know.
Yeah, sure. We tend to get some nuanced questions that we can answer offline, but one quick one to put in here. So You mentioned that scoring is based on 30 days of rolling data to create the risk scores you talked about earlier. How long is that behavior data retained? Like, is it limited to that 30 days, or is it retained longer than that? Can that be controlled? Any thoughts there?
So the behavior analytic component of the baseline is what is the rolling 30 days. So we use 30 days to get started, and then it's a rolling 30 days. So it adjusts accordingly. So it's never kept because behavior changes. Therefore, when we start doing behavior analytics, and let me just quickly, that's a really good question because I can quickly show you what an anomaly detection really looks like and why it is set up. So let me just quickly do one and show you exactly what are the differences. There are three really key pieces to the anomaly detections that we look at. We look at documents, and an anomaly is really based on that 30-day base, that baseline, and anything that's outside of that acceptable, what we call the corridor of acceptance. And we're looking at documents, we're looking at emails, and we're looking at resource usage. So every single one of those are different, and we have the ability to track and report against each one. So emails, the number of emails sent, the number of attachments sent. So if there's an anomaly, meaning now there's a larger amount of information being attached, or there's resources that are being accessed by a user that they don't normally access, specifically an application or specifically a network share, then it will flag it. Now, what does that mean to flag it? You want to know the threshold. So the corridor of tolerance will determine how many alerts you will receive and where those alerts will be sent as well. So if you really want to get every single alert based on that dark orange line is the baseline, and the light is your tolerance of that baseline of the anomaly differences. So every one of these red dots will turn into an alert. But if you want to just get just those that are just sufficiently outside, you can just leave it at normal. And all these actions are actually sent to an email, your operator, or whoever's responsible for the security. So the data is not kept from an anomaly point of view. The data moves and it changes based on the user. What we do keep is all the detailed data that I was referring to, all this information that are seen in the dashboard. All this information can be kept for 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, and that will be stored in the database, which is the SQL database.
Awesome, thanks.
If you want to dig into a particular user, the ability to actually look at one user and what they do at any point in time through the data retention period that you've kept, you would go through here and have the ability to look at them that way. There's multitude of ways of cutting the data and creating different reports, and that can also be scheduled. There's a lot more. I think I probably went over a little bit of my time, but I can hand it over to you, Christina, and then see if
Yeah,
there's any questions.
yeah, thanks for that. I think, like I mentioned before, we've gotten through some of the more nuanced ones via chat, and then had that one great question. Thanks for answering that, and thanks for doing such a great demo and dig into the tool. I think that's super helpful for everyone here now. As we wrap things up, remember to stick around. We're going to announce who our gift card winner is in just a moment. But before we do, want to just bring this conversation full circle. I know we had, Ken in the conversation earlier talk through, everything from the human element of cybersecurity to challenges that exist in understanding that and how we can work towards solving some of those issues. You've now seen technology that can help do that. I'm going to bring Ken back for a second. Any final, thoughts or anything to tie this all together that you want to add?
No, not a lot. I think the tool, looking at the tool, really kind of pulled in a lot of the things that we touched on, and there were some couple of good questions there. So no, I don't have a whole lot more to add. If there's anything that comes in offline, obviously I'm happy to chime in on those as well.
Okay, awesome. I did just see one quick question come in, and Suzanne, maybe you'll take this one, or Ken, feel free to jump in. But the question is, how does this differ from using like traditional data loss prevention or DLP solution?
Right. That's a good question. DLP has multiple definitions. So data loss prevention, meaning monitoring for alerting when the data is lost, or blocking and locking the user. So those are two different pieces. There are some solutions out there that will actually allow you to stop the user from working, lock them, and therefore they're off the network or have the inability to access. What we do is we monitor the data. We can block certain things, but our whole point is let the people do their job, monitor for behavior, monitor for anomaly, monitor for activity, throw in productivity. You literally have the whole gamut on all those three. DLP and the ability to prevent someone from doing something. The two items that we have would be the locking of the cloud, and also the list of websites you want to prevent them from going to. So it's complementary. To answer the particular question, how it differs, it complements it from those that are hardcore lock and block type solutions.
Got it. Thank you for answering that question. Yeah, it looks like that's the last question that we have in here. So thanks again, Susan, for the demo and for taking questions. Thanks again, Ken, for sharing your valuable insight. This has been a great conversation. And now, virtual drum roll for our gift card winner. I'm doing my like virtual tapping here. You probably can't hear it. Our winner is Haley, last name initial H. Haley H is the winner of our Amazon gift card. So congrats to Haley. The Veriato team will be reaching out to you with that. Again, thanks to our speakers today for providing this valuable perspective. Thank you to all of our attendees for spending the last hour with us. If you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to the team at sales@veriato.com, and be sure to stay safe and secure out there. Thanks, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you.